Greetings. I am John Locke, a philosopher of English descent. My life's work has been dedicated to exploring the nature of knowledge, government, and individual rights. Perhaps you are familiar with my writings, most notably the two treatises of government, which delve into the principles of natural law and the foundations of a just society. I am pleased to make your acquaintance and to engage in thoughtful discourse.
Greetings. I am John Stuart Mill, a philosopher and economist of English nationality. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. My life's work has been dedicated to the pursuit of truth and the betterment of society. You may know me from works such as On Liberty, where I explored the importance of individual freedom and its crucial role in a flourishing society. I welcome the chance to engage in thoughtful discourse with you.
Greetings. I am Confucius, a philosopher from China. Throughout my life, I have dedicated myself to the pursuit of knowledge and the cultivation of virtuous living. My teachings, as recorded in the Analects, emphasize the importance of filial piety, respect for elders, and the pursuit of harmony in society. It is a pleasure to meet you, and I welcome the chance to share my thoughts.
Today, we bridge over 2 millennia of human thought, gathering Confucius from the spring and autumn period of ancient China, Locke from the 17th century English Enlightenment, and Mill from the 19th century Victorian era, to see how your distinct historical views on rights, liberty, and social harmony answer our modern question of whether reclining an airplane seat is an absolute entitlement or an inconsiderate nuisance. Welcome, and I'm delighted we can explore this topic together. Locke, would you like to share your thoughts first?
Moderator. A purchased ticket constitutes a temporary property right, granting the passenger liberty to use the seat's functions as designed. Yet, imagine 2 men sharing a small boat in the state of nature. If one stretches his legs fully, forcing the other into the freezing water, does his right to stretch supersede the other's preservation? While the airline sold this reclining space, natural law dictates that one may only exercise property rights provided there is enough and as good left in common for others. The true nuisance is the sovereign airline, which has unjustly enclosed the cabin so tightly that exercising one man's contracted liberty inherently becomes a trespass upon his neighbors.
Mr. Locke, while you rightly condemn the airline's structural greed, my harm principle dictates that an individual's liberty to recline ceases the moment it inflicts tangible pain upon another. Imagine a 19th century London workhouse where a man legally acquires a long-handled spoon that inherently knocks the gruel from his neighbor's bowl whenever used. Does his property right justify the actual starvation inflicted? You might argue the neighbor must direct his grievance at the workhouse master, yet the immediate moral burden to minimize aggregate suffering rests squarely upon the spoon's wielder. Consequently, reclining is not an absolute ticket-granted entitlement, but a conditional liberty strictly governed by the utilitarian calculus of mutual welfare.
Mr. Mill, your utilitarian calculus dangerously conflates mere inconvenience with a violation of fundamental natural rights. You suggest the passenger bears the primary moral burden, yet this absolves the sovereign airline of its contractual fraud in selling the exact same spatial property to 2 different men. Consider a 17th century landlord who leases a single narrow pasture to 2 shepherds. If one's flock grazes, the other inevitably starves. If we demand individuals forfeit their rightfully purchased property merely to manage this artificial scarcity, do we not invite tyrants to engineer such miseries, knowing the populace will police themselves rather than rebel?
Mr. Locke, while you astutely identify the airline's structural deceit, systemic injustice does not dissolve our immediate moral obligations. Imagine two 19th-century textile workers forced by a ruthless mill owner to share a single protective mask. Does one worker's contractual claim justify letting his peer inhale toxic dust while awaiting labor reforms? By demanding we exercise enclosed property rights to the maximum, you would have us inflict guaranteed suffering today merely to protest a corporate tyrant's architecture. We must separate our legal grievance against the airline from the utilitarian duty of mutual compromise we owe our fellow passengers.
Mr. Locke and Mr. Mill, your arguments reduce this cabin to a battleground of contracts and calculus, ignoring that true harmony stems from Ren. Imagine a corrupt magistrate in my era legally granting you the right to harvest a starving neighbor's field. Do you wield this right to destroy him, or do you yield to preserve your shared humanity? While the airline acts as an unjust ruler by selling overlapping space, a superior man never lets a sovereign's greed extinguish his own virtue. Demanding absolute rights at the expense of another's physical space merely transforms us into barbarians with tickets.
Master Confucius and Mr. Mill, while I revere your appeals to humaneness, voluntarily surrendering a contracted right to accommodate a sovereign's theft merely invites further subjugation. Imagine a 17th-century monarch who deliberately builds a public bridge too narrow for two carts, relying on the peasants to politely yield out of virtue rather than demand a proper crossing. If the people constantly absorb the cost of this artificial scarcity, will the tyrant ever widen the bridge? You argue immediate peace outweighs property claims. Yet yielding our rightful space transforms the victim's morality into a convenient shield for the airline's structural fraud. Must we indefinitely sacrifice our contracted liberties simply to subsidize the greed of those who engineer our confinement?
Mr. Locke, using a fellow passenger's suffering to protest structural greed violates the harm principle. Imagine a 19th-century railway that deliberately underheats a carriage. If a heavily coated man opens the window to cool his face, freezing his neighbors, is his action justified merely because their agony might force a complaint to the conductor? You assume exercising rights exposes corporate fraud, yet inflicting guaranteed immediate misery for hypothetical future reform is a disastrous utilitarian calculus. We must separate political agitation from moral duty. Must we reduce fellow humans to mere instruments of our structural protests?
Mr. Locke, you fear that yielding our space subsidizes the airline's tyranny. Yet asserting your contracted recline merely makes you the instrument of their cruelty. Imagine a cruel feudal duke who deliberately provides one small warming mat for two scholars at a freezing banquet. If the stronger scholar aggressively claims his rightful half, forcing his peer onto the ice to protest the duke's stinginess, the duke has not only hoarded his wealth, but successfully degraded a civilized man into a beast. This reveals the central axis of our discourse. True rebellion against structural greed is not fought by crushing our neighbors, but by preserving our Ren despite the architecture of our confinement. Must we accept your premise that asserting a right requires inflicting harm, when turning backward to respectfully negotiate the recline fiercely defies the airline's attempt to reduce us to unfeeling cargo?
Master Confucius, I concede your profound point. Blindly asserting a property right to crush a neighbor fractures the social trust that rights are meant to protect. Yet Mr. Mill, choosing to negotiate does not invalidate the property right itself. Imagine two 17th-century shipwrecked sailors claiming the same narrow floating mast. They do not forfeit their right to preservation, but must rationally communicate to balance their weight rather than drown together. This reveals our convergence. Turning backward to negotiate the recline is not surrendering our purchased liberty, but forging a micro-social contract within the cabin's artificial state of nature. If true liberty necessitates such mutual consent, does the airline's deliberate architecture of conflict not expose them as the ultimate enemy of both humaneness and natural law?
As moderator, I observe a profound convergence here. Locke, you have brilliantly synthesized your 17th century concept of the social contract with Confucius's ancient principle of Ren, suggesting passengers must form a micro-social contract to negotiate the recline and survive the cabin's artificial state of nature. You are both capturing the truth that systemic oppression requires an interpersonal moral response to prevent us from degrading into mere beasts. Yet, a dialectical tension remains between immediate interpersonal duty and long-term structural reform. If we accept that passengers must constantly yield or negotiate their space to mitigate the airline's engineered scarcity, are we not simply shifting the burden of justice entirely onto the exhausted individuals? Mill, speaking from your 19th century industrial era where systemic exploitation was rampant, does relying on these polite interpersonal micro-contracts actually maximize utility, or does it merely pacify the passengers while the airline continues to quietly profit from their engineered misery?
Moderator, relying solely on polite micro-contracts merely subsidizes the airline's greed by privately absorbing the friction they engineered. Imagine a 19th century coal mine where laborers politely take turns breathing near a single ventilation shaft. Their noble cooperation prevents immediate suffocation, yet it guarantees the mine owner will never invest in proper airflow. While Mr. Locke and Master Confucius rightly urge us to negotiate our recline to prevent immediate harm, true utilitarianism dictates that our interpersonal civility must not pacify our pursuit of systemic reform. We must spare our neighbor's knees today, but must we not simultaneously redirect our aggregate dissatisfaction upward to legally regulate these monopolistic architectures?
Mill, speaking from the 19th century industrial exploitation, you capture the truth of structural justice, while Confucius, from the chaotic spring and autumn period, you capture the truth of personal virtue. You propose an elegant dual approach, yielding our immediate space to preserve harmony while simultaneously directing our collective outrage at the airline. Yet a profound dialectical contradiction emerges in this synthesis. If our interpersonal virtue successfully absorbs and masks the friction engineered by the airline, the very catalyst required for systemic reform vanishes entirely. The sovereign only widens the bridge or regulates the cabin when the micro-social contract visibly breaks down and chaos disrupts their profit. Confucius, if maintaining Ren by politely yielding our recline inadvertently guarantees the airline will continue to compress and exploit future passengers, does our immediate virtue actually make us complicit in a polite but permanent tyranny?
Moderator, true Ren is never passive complicity, for as Mr. Mill rightly observes, we must simultaneously practice Yi to correct systemic wrongs. Imagine a corrupt minister who constructs a ceremonial hall so cramped that officials must kneel upon one another's robes. Violently shoving a peer destroys one's own humanity, yet suffering silently without petitioning the ruler abandons one's duty to justice. We negotiate our airplane recline not to shield the airline's greed, but to preserve our moral agency while jointly demanding equitable conditions. A superior man endures physical constraint without losing his grace, yet he never confuses interpersonal harmony with submission to an unjust sovereign.
As moderator, I observe a fascinating historical tension in how we confront authority. Confucius, speaking from the 6th century BCE, where authority was absolute but ideally moral, you brilliantly introduce Yi to show that maintaining interpersonal propriety is not submission, but the very foundation for petitioning an unjust ruler. Locke, from your 17th century era of the social contract, you capture the truth that rights must be actively claimed and exercised to structurally check a sovereign's power. These perspectives reveal a deeper dialectic. Confucius separates interpersonal moral endurance from political petition, while for Locke, the active assertion of property rights is the primary mechanism of political resistance. If we accept that we must endure the physical constraint of an upright seat to preserve harmony while merely petitioning the airline, the actual right to recline purchased with the ticket seems to vanish entirely in practice. Locke, in your framework of natural rights, can a passenger truly possess a property right to their physical space if they are morally obligated by interpersonal duty to never actually exercise it?
Moderator, a property right does not vanish because natural law guides us to exercise it with charity. Liberty is the freedom to choose how to dispose of one's possessions. Imagine a 17th century farmer owning a well during a severe drought. If he voluntarily rations his water to save a dying neighbor, his property right is not negated, but elevated through moral agency. Master Confucius and Mr. Mill, negotiating my recline is not surrendering my right, but exercising my sovereign will to forge a mutual pact of preservation. Since the airline deliberately sells overlapping spatial property to engineer this conflict, must we not recognize the true violator is the fraudulent merchant rather than the passenger?
Locke, speaking from the 17th century emergence of modern property rights, you brilliantly distinguish between the possession of a right and its charitable execution, capturing the truth of individual sovereignty. You align with Confucius's ancient virtue of Ren, agreeing that passengers must act charitably toward the person behind them, yet you expose the airline for committing fundamental fraud by selling the exact same spatial volume twice. However, a profound structural contradiction emerges in this synthesis of moral charity and property rights. If we continuously elevate our moral agency by rationing our purchased recline to save our neighbors from crushed knees, we effectively subsidize the airline's fraudulent contract with our own physical discomfort. This interpersonal consideration inadvertently creates a perfect shield for corporate exploitation, masking the very friction needed to force systemic change. Mill, from your 19th century utilitarian perspective, at what point does our moral obligation to be considerate to the passenger behind us become a harmful complicity that prevents the necessary collapse of the airline's exploitative business model?
Moderator, interpersonal charity becomes harmful complicity the moment it systematically masks the structural suffering necessary to provoke legislative reform. Mr. Locke and Master Confucius suggest our moral elevation justifies this endurance. But consider a 19th century English match factory, where workers secretly pool their meager wages to treat a colleague's phosphorus necrosis. Their noble charity prevents immediate starvation, Yet it allows the owner to continue poisoning workers without public outcry or parliamentary intervention. This reveals a dangerous paradox in our utilitarian calculus. Individual virtue that quietly absorbs systemic shocks ultimately decreases aggregate happiness by perpetuating the exploitative architecture. Must we not then recognize that politely refusing to recline is merely a temporary anesthetic, and that true utility requires us to eventually let the friction of our colliding seats force the sovereign to regulate the space?
As moderator, I observe a stark methodological clash rooted in your distinct historical eras. Mill, speaking from the 19th century age of labor strikes and parliamentary reforms, you capture the truth of systemic disruption, that social friction is often the necessary catalyst for structural justice. Confucius, speaking from the chaotic spring and autumn period, where total social collapse was the ultimate terror, you capture the truth of moral preservation, that we must not destroy our interpersonal humanity to fix a corrupt system. This reveals a profound dialectical tension. Mill suggests we must actually recline our seats and let the knees be crushed to force the airline's hand, essentially weaponizing our fellow passengers' discomfort for collective progress. Yet this utilitarian calculus risks treating the person behind us as a mere means to a political end. Confucius, if we intentionally cause this physical friction to expose the airline's greed, as Mill suggests, do we not destroy the very wren that makes our shared society worth saving in the first place?
Mr. Mill, to deliberately crush a neighbor's knees as a catalyst for systemic reform is to adopt the very cruelty of the airline we seek to oppose, destroying the wren that makes society worth preserving. Imagine a tyrannical warlord of my spring and autumn period who imposes a grain tax so severe that families starve. If a man intentionally steals his neighbor's last bowl of rice merely to provoke a village riot against the warlord, has he not become a tyrant himself? You argue that this friction is a necessary utilitarian cost, yet a just structure cannot be built upon the ashes of interpersonal virtue. When we treat our fellow passenger as a mere instrument of protest, we sever the root of human morality to save the branches. Must we not instead, as Mr. Locke suggests, elevate our moral agency by voluntarily yielding our purchased recline, and then unite with our neighbor, not as antagonists in an engineered conflict, but as unified gentlemen demanding righteous governance from the sovereign together?
Confucius, speaking from the ancient Chinese ideal of moral governance, you capture the profound truth that systemic justice cannot be built upon interpersonal cruelty. You propose a beautiful synthesis to resolve Mill's utilitarian friction, preserving wren by voluntarily yielding the recline, while simultaneously uniting with our neighbor to challenge the airline's fraudulent contract. Yet, bringing this moral alliance into the 17th century framework of empirical property rights reveals a new dialectical paradox. If we entirely suspend the exercise of our right to recline to maintain harmony, the airline's spatial fraud remains invisible and theoretical, as no actual collision of property occurs to adjudicate. It seems that to expose the systemic failure, the right must perhaps be actively attempted, even if we immediately withdraw it out of charity. Locke, if a passenger voluntarily and permanently abstains from exercising their purchased right to recline in order to preserve interpersonal peace, do they still possess the tangible standing to accuse the merchant of theft?
Moderator. A property right is established by acquisition, not relentless execution. Charitably suspending one's recline never dissolves the standing to condemn the airline's fraud. Imagine a 17th century merchant who buys a pasture but voluntarily leaves it unfenced for a destitute shepherd. If the crown secretly sold that exact deed to the shepherd, the merchant's charity does not erase the sovereign's theft. Mr. Mill, you assume injury is invisible without the friction of crushed knees. Yet the violation occurred the moment overlapping spatial property was sold. Master Confucius, we may preserve humaneness by yielding our seat, while retaining absolute legal standing to prosecute the airline's engineered conflict.
As moderator, I observe a brilliant distinction between abstract rights and empirical harm, rooted deeply in your respective eras. Locke, speaking from the 17th century dawn of contract theory, you locate the truth of the violation in the abstract legal fraud at the exact moment the ticket is sold. Mill, speaking from the 19th century industrial reality, where abstract rights often masked horrific factory conditions, you locate the truth of the violation in the empirical suffering required to mobilize political reform. In truth, these perspectives are complementary. Abstract legal standing provides the justification for the passenger's grievance, while empirical friction provides the societal momentum for structural change. Yet a fatal practical contradiction emerges. If every passenger adopts Locke's charitable suspension of their recline to preserve Confucius's harmony, the airline's spatial fraud remains infinitely profitable and completely invisible to the regulators who could stop it. Mill, if abstract rights without visible suffering fail to trigger legislative intervention, does utilitarianism demand that we abandon this silent charity and actively recline our seats to force the systemic crisis?
Moderator, silent endurance cannot cure systemic exploitation. Imagine a 19th century chimney sweep whose master builds flues so narrow the boy scrapes his flesh to the bone. If the child quietly hides his bleeding to preserve the household's peace, Parliament never witnesses the horror required to pass the chimney sweeper's act. Master Confucius and Mr. Locke, your voluntary suspension of the purchased recline preserves temporary harmony. But this quiet martyrdom merely subsidizes the airline's fraudulent architecture, guaranteeing future passengers suffer the identical cramped fate. True utilitarianism distinguishes between genuine social welfare and the mere suppression of symptoms. Abstract rights without visible friction fail to provoke necessary legislative intervention. Are we truly practicing humaneness by protecting one passenger today if our complicit silence ensures the mechanical crushing of thousands of knees tomorrow?
Mill, speaking from the 19th century reality of industrial reform, you powerfully capture the truth that hidden suffering rarely motivates the sovereign to act. You see the necessity of systemic disruption, while Confucius sees the absolute necessity of interpersonal moral preservation. Yet, applying your industrial strike tactics to the airplane cabin reveals a fatal structural blind spot in this dialectic. In a factory strike, the friction is directed at the factory owner. But by reclining your seat to force a crisis, you are inflicting the physical suffering entirely upon a fellow victim, while the airline executives remain perfectly comfortable on the ground. True synthesis requires a method of exposing the structural fraud without sacrificing the interpersonal ren that binds the passengers together. Confucius, if silent endurance makes us complicit in the airline's exploitation, but crushing our neighbor's knees makes us tyrants, how exactly can a gentleman actively protest this spatial theft without inflicting harm upon his fellow passenger?
Moderator, a gentleman protests not by harming his neighbor, but by uniting with him to redirect the friction upward toward the sovereign airline. Imagine a corrupt magistrate in my era who assigns two scholars the exact same bamboo mat for a royal examination. If they wrestle, they destroy their virtue. But if one silently sits in the mud, the systemic corruption remains perfectly hidden. Instead, if both scholars stand together holding the mat aloft, refusing to take the exam until the magistrate provides adequate space, they halt the machinery of the state through unified righteousness. Mr. Mill, you falsely assume physical agony is the sole catalyst for reform. When both passengers collectively summon the flight attendant to formally document the overlapping space, they expose the spatial theft and disrupt the fraudulent system without crushing a single knee.